We are back. And this is a topic, guys, that we've had come up quite a bit amongst my own community. And then every time we publish something as it relates to focus, right? Or concentrating, or what platform should I be on? And kind of the shiny object syndrome, right? All these various things that a lot of people cite, it all really comes down to being distracted, right? And that's a huge thing, especially in 2019 when there's a million different platforms, and then it's this strategy, and this expert tells you this, and that expert tells you something else. And it's like, what do I do with all of this stuff? Right. So anyway, so the guy joining me today, I'm going to introduce you here, actually wrote the book literally called Indistractible, which I'm not sure, I didn't ask and I need to when that actually comes out. We're going to talk about that today, as well as a previous book that I'm intrigued with, which is Hooked. And actually, funny story, I just had a buddy of mine that was staying with us, and it was on the kitchen table, and he's like, you got to read this book. It's Hooked. It's amazing. And then and this is no bullshit. This is real. And then a friend of mine was like, hey, my buddy Nir is like, he's writing this book. And I'm like, you got to be shitting me. Like, as I'm not kidding you. As I'm sitting there reading his text, I look behind me, and the book, hold up, I don't know if you can see it. Can you see the book right over here? I don't know if you can or not.
Yeah, I can see the yellow cover, right?
Yeah. So anyway, no bullshit. It's right behind me on the kitchen table as he texts me that. And I'm like, like the universe just aligned and said, like, this was supposed to happen. So
that's right. It's like an Oprah moment here. The universe is trying to tell you something,
right? Like, read this book. You must read this book. So, and it was interesting because it was around the same time, like I said, that we were just getting a lot of people just citing, whether it was clients of mine or people in my communities being like, man, I just don't know what to focus on. So anyway, so I haven't introduced you yet, Mr. Nir Eyal. I didn't butcher it, right?
That was great. As long as you get the first name right, Nir. That's the most important part. There aren't that many Nirs out there, so that's
not many Nirs out there. All right, man. Anyways, welcome to the show. How the heck are you? How's New York?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much, Chris. Great. Thanks for having me.
Sweet. Awesome, dude. So for those that aren't familiar, obviously I kind of gave them a high level view of obviously they know you write books now. They can see them right there behind you above your head. But what got you into all this stuff? The wanting to write books about distractibility and Hooked and stuff like. Obviously, we're going to focus on Indistractible today, but what kind of pushed you down that path? Was it entrepreneurship and kind of an entrepreneurial journey? And you're like, oh my gosh, those same kind of pain points that I described. Kind of give us that 30,000 foot view of who you are and what you do and what led you to that.
Yeah. So today I would call myself a behavioral designer, which means that I help companies build products and services that help change consumer behavior for good, right? To create healthy habits.
Yeah.
So Hooked is used by companies to help people build habits like going to the gym. If you use Fitbot, is a great app that uses the Hook model. Kahoot is the largest educational software on the planet. And it's a product that uses the Hook model for building healthy habits in kids in schools. Paga is an app that brought millions of previously unbanked people online in Africa for the first time. So that's really the idea behind Hooked, is how do you build the kind of products and services that benefit people's lives, that improve people's lives, if they would only use the product, right? Because so many businesses out there, they're struggling. They have great products and services, but people don't use the products and services. So that's really what Hooked was about.
Interesting.
Now, Indistractible is a little bit like the other side of the coin, that these products and services are clearly designed to be the kind of products that you want to engage with. So when you think about today's distractions like Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and Slack and Snapchat, right? All these products and services, they are clearly designed to hook you. I mean, I know I wrote the book about it, right? They use
You're like counteracting your own book. It's you're selling the cigarettes and telling them it's bad for you at the same time.
Well, cigarette. Okay, so that's a lot. That's a perception.
I know that's not a. Yeah,
cool. It's cool. It's a very common perception, but like cigarettes, there's nothing good about them.
Sure.
Like you're not getting, other than maybe the enjoyment from the smoker, or that's even a complicated topic, but we can talk about that later.
Sure.
There's nothing good about them. Whereas when it comes to the products that we use every day, these tech products, we get a lot of benefit out them, right? Like, I don't know where I'd be without social media. Nobody would have ever heard of me. I self-published my book. Had it not been for companies like Amazon and Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and these companies, like I need these products for my livelihood.
Totally.
And so a few years ago, two simultaneous things happened. One, I found I was becoming more distracted, that I would have time with my daughter, and yet I'd be checking my phone. I'd sit down to write, and yet I'd Google something just for a minute, or I'd go to dinner with friends, and like half the table would be on their phones. And so I kind of started saying, what exactly is going on here? This was about 5 years ago. And then another thing happened is that a lot of people started blaming the technology. that the technology was doing it to us, right? This like current techlash, that technology is hijacking your brain and it's, designed to get you addicted. And at first I kind of like bought into that a little bit. And I started doing some research around, what is addiction and can you get addicted to technology? And, is it hijacking our brain? And, I read these books that told me to take a 30-day digital detox. You can see, so I've got a whole bookcase of, different books on this topic.
Yeah.
And, they tell you to do a digital detox or, a 30-day plan. And none of that shit worked. I tried all of it and it didn't work. And it didn't work for the same reason that fad diets don't work.
Sure.
That if I used to be clinically obese at one point in my life, and I would go on these fad diets of, no fast food for 30 days. Right. And you know what happened on day 31, right? Like, like crazy, right? And so unless you deal with a deeper reason why we do these things, why do we harm ourselves even when we know we shouldn't do a behavior that is going to hurt us? That was really the question in my mind that I wanted to address. It's such a fascinating question, right? Why do we do things we know are bad for us? And so what started out as like a book exploring technology actually became a much deeper inquiry into the psychology of distraction at large. Why do we do anything that we don't want to do? And why don't we do the things we know we should do?
Now I can see over, which I guess is your right ear. I can see, it looks like Power of Habit. So immediately I'm thinking largely like, was that kind of a lot of what you came up with? Was it based on some of the principles of that book? Because you say that and I'm like, a lot of this stuff is because it's become habitual. Like we're habit forming creatures. Right. And so you talk about food. I think the big problem is when they try to stop doing something, they don't replace it with something else. Right. So like the cold turkey stuff that you just try to quit and stop doing, it's like your basal ganglia is like, but I have this habit and I have to feed this habit. Right. And so where, I guess, was a lot of this drawn off of like, where do you start, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Where the heck?
Well, let's start with Duhigg. That's a good place to start, that Power of Habit book, because it's a great book. A lot of people have read it. I guess the part that I disagree with, and a lot of people will repeat this, and it's the evidence doesn't, the scientific evidence doesn't back it up, that, if you want to stop a bad habit, you have to replace it with a different habit. So the story that Charles Duhigg tells, not that I'm like, I don't mean to dog on him. I think he's
no. Sure.
But I just don't agree with this particular perspective, right? Reasonable people can disagree. So he says, he gained 15 pounds. He was eating a cookie every single day and he's gained a bunch of weight. So he wanted to get out of the habit of eating this cookie every day.
Right.
So what did he do? He took the advice that a lot of, habit gurus will tell you of, well, replace the bad habit with a different habit.
Right.
And so what did he do?
Fundamentally makes sense.
Yeah. Well, let's take it a step further. He replaced the habit of eating the cookie every day with talking to a colleague. That actually the real reason he wanted to eat the cookie was because he was lonely and he wanted to go spend time with a colleague and take a break.
Sure.
The thing is, if I'm honest with you, look, I struggled with obesity for many years of my life. And let me tell you that Mel from accounting is not going to be a good substitute for, chewy, gooey, chocolatey chewiness that I wanted, that I craved.
Yeah.
That was not going to do it for me. And so I think it requires going a little bit further. It requires an extra step here, which is to understand what I call the internal triggers.
Okay.
These uncomfortable emotional states that we seek to escape, that in fact, all of our behavior, okay, everything we do, and this is going to come as a shock to some people. It certainly was a shock to me. When you think about the first principles of motivation, why do we do anything that we do? Many people think it's carrots and sticks, right? It's pain and pleasure.
Sure.
This is called Freud's pleasure principle.
Sure.
Not true. Turns out that all human motivation, everything you do for one reason. And that one reason is to modulate your mood, to feel something different. It's all about the avoidance of pain. It's not about pleasure and pain. It's all about the avoidance of discomfort. Even the pursuit of pleasure is itself psychologically uncomfortable. Wanting, craving, desiring something is itself unsettling psychologically. This is called the homeostatic response. So if you're cold, you put on a jacket. If you feel hunger pangs, you eat. Those are physiological sensations,
Sure.
But psychological sensations work the same way. If you are lonely, you check Facebook.
Right.
If you're uncertain, you Google. If
Right.
you are bored, well, you check ESPN, you check sports scores, you check the news, you check Twitter, you check Pinterest. I mean, it goes on and on.
Yeah.
So what this means is fundamentally where we start. To answer your question, where do we start? We start with this understanding that if all our behavior is driven by a desire to escape discomfort, that means that time management is pain management. And we don't hear that message enough. We don't hear this message that it is perfectly normal to be dissatisfied. I have a whole chapter in my book where I talk about how our species is designed for dissatisfaction. But the self-help industry tells us that if you're not happy, you're not normal. And I'm here to tell you that nothing could be further from the truth, that our species evolved to be perpetually perturbed. We always want more. And so what most people do, they blame themselves. They think, oh, I'm not happy, so there's nothing wrong with me. I have short attention span. I have an addictive personality. There's something wrong with me. Or they blame the product. They say, oh, you see, the tech companies are trying to addict me, or the news is trying to, do this to me. So they either fall into the camp of blamers or shamers. And it turns out that the truth is neither of those things. The truth is that these are our behaviors. These are habits, and habits can change if we know how to change them.
Okay. So much we could talk about and unpack with that. Do you think that this is more of what I would call maybe a modern
Dilemma?
Dilemma. There you go. Maybe a good word to use. Or because, so if you look back to like our if you look back in terms of lineage, right? Our ancient ancestors, it was more of like, you wake up and you're just trying not to die. So like survive and thrive. So when have when has it changed to the point that now it's like, well, I'm just bored, bro, and I'm looking for something to do, right? So I need that like dopamine response of like, boom, some instant gratification of somebody liked my stuff, somebody commented on this, I made a sale, I got new followers, I got new subscribers, whatever, right? So is that something that's happened to us evolutionarily over time? I probably just made that word up, but it sounded good. Or was this always just an innate part of who we are? It's just that our ancient ancestors didn't have that same opportunity with those distractions that we now have in the modern world.
Yeah. So the hardwiring has been here forever, has been here for the past 200,000 years. I mean, boredom, if you think about it, there's a lot of evidence that people will do a lot of crazy things to escape boredom. I mean, there was one study I talk about in the book. I think it was Timothy Wilson who did the study, where he put people in a room and he just told them, just sit here for 10 minutes, just do nothing. And all they had was a little buzzer that sent an electrical shock on their wrist. That's all they could do. They could just sit there with the buzzer in their hand. And a huge proportion of people shot themselves to escape the boredom of doing nothing. And you think about it, right? Like our species on the savannah 200,000 years ago, you would want a species to be bored. You would want a species to constantly be restless, right?
Yes.
Think about the tribe of people, if there ever was one, who was satisfied with life. Everything was just great, right? Those people got killed and probably eaten by our ancestors.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's evolutionarily beneficial to constantly want more, to be dissatisfied. Now, that same dissatisfaction can help us do great things. It helps us create life-saving medicine, to overturn despots, to shoot for the moon. All of these things occur because we want more. But of course, if we don't know how to channel them correctly, they can be very hurtful. They can harm us. But I think the inborn tendency to always want more, to always have the tendency towards distraction is innate. Now, I think it's certainly become more challenging since the dawn of civilization, right? So let's go back 2,500 years ago, not 200,000 years ago, but 2,500 years ago. Socrates and Plato talk about the nature of akrasia. Like literally 2,500 years ago. We
just talked about this on the show like 2 weeks ago.
There you go. So they talked about how the world is such a distracting place. We're talking 2,500 years ago, right? Today, I do agree, though, that if you are looking for distraction today, if you are looking for distraction and you do not have the tools to cope with distraction, they're going to get you. They're going to get you. They're going to get your kids. They're going to get your colleagues. That these devices that we all carry around with us every day are designed to engage us. I know, I wrote the book on it. I wrote Hooked. I can tell you from the insider's perspective, that's what these products are designed to do. But here's the thing. You could take it a couple different ways. You could say to yourself, oh, you see, it's sinister. These companies, they want to do this to you. They want you to spend time on it. To which I say, Is this news to anybody? Like, is it news that these companies are attention merchants? They always profit on your attention. Their business model is advertising. It's the same business model as the New York Times, same business model as CNN, same business model as Fox News. It's all about capturing your attention and selling it to an advertiser. That's Facebook's business model, or Instagram, or whatever.
Yeah, but if they didn't do that, people would complain, be like, "This is just not engaging," and then they would go. They would
exactly.
Right? So they want it. They just don't know that they want it, kind of thing. You know what I mean?
That's right. So it's not a problem. It's progress. We want these products to be engaging. It's like saying, "Hey, Netflix, you make really good shows. I want to watch a lot. Can you please?" Yeah, make boring stuff. That makes no sense. And the fact is, we're not going back, guys. Like, it's not. These products are not going to suddenly disappear. We want them to exist. Yeah. And the fact is, we are way more powerful than we believe. We can use some very simple tactics to put distraction in its place if we try and if we know these tactics.
Okay. So there's, again, we can touch on here. So is it a matter of, okay, so it's not replacing. And I do agree with you on the point of having dissatisfaction, because I personally feel, and I read something, I don't remember where it was from, but it was talking about how important being bored was, because when you're bored, it's like you have these innovative thoughts. Like, so for example, it's something that I do with being a hyperactive, all over the place, sometimes sporadic mind. But every 2 weeks I make myself go do float therapy, sensory deprivation. And I'm just in there and I am literally as bored can be. Right. Yeah. But I come out of that thing, man, and I have like the answers to all the things that are maybe right in front of me. Right. So I do think creating the space. So that's something that I've been teaching a lot is and maybe you would agree with this. I think part of the focus issue is we don't create the space for it to happen. Right. It's like, we've got a 5-pound bag and we're trying to pour 100 pounds of sand in it. And it's like, why won't it fit? And it's like, dude, you got to create some space for this stuff to happen. Like, clarity doesn't happen unless you create the bandwidth for it to happen. So is that part of your principle, your teaching is, look, we need to stay away from some of these things, have a little bit of discomfort, have a little bit of boredom, so that we do create the space for having clarity and not being distracted by all these various things, and more of a focused mind on what we want to accomplish in the world. Would you kind of say that's kind of in line with your research? Yeah,
I think what we want to do is to align our time with our values. That I'm not one of these people that tells you that, playing video games is bad and Facebook is bad, but watching, football on TV is somehow morally superior. Give me a break.
Sure.
Like, you should spend your time however you want to spend your time.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between a diversion and a distraction. A diversion can be, hey, you know what? I just want to chill out a little bit. I want my mind to relax. I want to go to, if it's meditation, if it's a sensory deprivation booth, if it's a walk outside, if it's a video game, if it's a movie, go for it. Do it. What you don't want is distraction. So let me just define distraction for a minute. What are we talking about when we say distraction? Why is it different from a diversion?
Okay.
The definition of a distraction, to understand what distractions are, we have to understand the opposite of distraction. The opposite of distraction is not focus.
Interesting.
The opposite of distraction is traction. Traction and distraction both come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. Traction is any action. You'll notice both traction and distraction end in the same letters, A-C-T-I-O-N, action.
Yeah.
So traction is any action that pulls you towards what you want in life. It pulls you to things that you do with intent.
Interesting.
The opposite of traction is distraction. It's anything that is not what you plan to do, anything you are not doing with intent. So there's nothing wrong with diversion, right? The time you plan to waste is not wasted time.
Yeah.
As long as you planned it with intent, as opposed to, like I say, I use every social media network. I love them all. They're fantastic. I love them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I use them on my schedule, not on the app maker schedule.
Interesting. Okay. So that was kind of what I want to talk to you about next was what do you do, right? Because I would definitely, in many instances, not as much now, but definitely in the past, would go so far to the other side of being, like I said, a masochist about it, right? Like, I need to be just miserable. And like, this is part of the process, and not enjoying the journey at all, right? Like, not celebrating gratitude and all these things. So where do you find that middle ground where you have this, right? You are satisfied, but you're also still enjoying the things, like you said, that creating the schedule that you can still enjoy and kind of, while still being productive and moving towards your goal. So how has that looked like for you to be able to kind of juggle all these things and find that nice, sense of balance in this whole thing?
Sure. So there's 4 basic steps. So I want to give you kind of an overview of how you do this. So think about a horizontal line. To the right, you have traction. To the left, you have distraction. Okay. So 2 arrows pointing out.
Sure.
Now, remember, traction and distraction, these are not things that happen to us. These are actions. They end in ACTION and they end in action. So it's what you do. It's not things that happen to you.
Sure.
So what drives our behavior? What drives our action towards traction or distraction? 2 things. External triggers or internal triggers. So only 2 things move towards traction and distraction. External triggers are the pings, dings, rings, all of these things in our environment that move us towards things we want to do, traction. Like let's say you get an alarm that says, hey, it's time to go work out, and then you go work out. Terrific. That's traction. But if you get a ping on your phone while you're hanging out with your buddies and you intended to be together, and now you're, putzing around on your phone as opposed to being fully present with people you love, well, now that's distraction. So those are external triggers. But the most important piece of everything I discovered here in my research, 5 years it took me to write this book,
that's crazy,
is that most distraction starts from within. And it starts from within from these internal triggers, these uncomfortable emotional states. This is why we do everything we do, is to escape discomfort. So what do we do with these internal triggers? How do we do the first step, which is all about mastering the internal triggers? And this is really... What's that?
Would you call those cravings? Was that another, would that be synonymous with what you're talking about?
Sure. Yeah. It's an uncomfortable sensation that you seek to escape. So it can be physiological. It can be a craving. It can be a desire. It can be loneliness, fatigue, uncertainty, any kind of uncomfortable emotional state.
There's a wide spectrum then.
Yes. Yeah. And it spurs all our behaviors.
Sure.
So there's only 2 things we can do about those internal triggers. We can either fix the source of the discomfort, or we can learn to cope with it. And so what I give folks are these strategies to do either. So some things you can't resolve on your own. For example, a huge source of distraction is the workplace. A lot of people work in really crappy work environments with really awful cultures. I've been one of them for a long time. I worked at companies that had really terrible work cultures. And guess what people do when their work causes anxiety, stress, uncertainty, fatigue? They look for escape. And you know what they do when they look for escape? They send emails, they call meetings, they make work. It's called pseudo work. They put this pseudo work on top of other people. And so that just makes this whole situation even worse. But the source of the problem isn't the emails. The source of the problem is this crappy workplace culture. So there's a whole section in the book about how to create an indistractable workplace culture. It's not just for, CEOs and managers. It's for anybody at any work environment about how to fix your workplace culture.
Cool.
But then the second part, and this is what we can do individually, is about how we can master our internal triggers by learning to cope with them in a healthier manner. And so there are all kinds of techniques we can use to deal with those internal triggers in a way that's healthful and leads to traction as opposed to distraction. So that's the first step.
That's what I'm curious about then, what those things look like. But I mean, interrupt your thought. Continue.
No, not at all. So that's the very first step. Do you want me to go around the circle, or do you want me to go deeper into one area?
Kill around the circle, and then we'll circle back to it.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So step 1 has to be master the internal triggers.
Right.
Step 2 is make time for traction. So we talked about traction versus distraction. Here's the thing. You can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. So there's a lady in the book, I do a case study. I talked about this case study of a friend of mine who, complained to me about how distracting the world is. I can't get anything done. It's so terrible. Everything that's in the news, and, her boss wants this and her kids want that. And then I said, what was on your schedule to do today? What is it that these things distracted you from?
Yeah.
And she took out her phone and she showed me her calendar app, and it was blank. There's nothing on it. So you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. And so this means we have to turn our values into time. So many of us suffer from this loneliness epidemic that's happening in this country. That the psychologists tell us that loneliness is more detrimental to our health than smoking and obesity. Part of the reason this happens is that we don't plan time to be with our friends. We say, oh, it's going to happen whenever it happens.
Right.
The same with physical fitness. Yeah, sure. I'll go on a run someday. The same with work. You say you're going to do that big project, but you don't do it because it's not on your calendar. And so we have been sold this bag of lies around the to-do list that if you want to just get stuff done, put it on your to-do list, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way because the items on your to-do list are forms of output. It's your wish list for what you want to do. It's like a baker, right? So if you're a baker, your output is loaves of bread, let's say, right? But to make loaves of bread, you need inputs. You need flour, you need sugar, you need yeast, you need the inputs.
Right.
So we only think about the outputs of all the stuff we want to get done, and we don't think about the input, the time that's required to do those things.
Totally.
So that's the second step. Make time for traction and plan that time.
Yeah.
The third step is to hack back the external triggers. So these are all the pings, dings, rings, and things that prompt us to traction or distraction. And so I give 8 different environments: email, cell phone, laptop, meetings, all a group chat, all of these different environments that we work in that can lead to either traction or distraction. And I tell you how to hack back all of the external triggers in those various environments. And then the last step, and then we can get into detail, which for the ones that are more interesting or more valuable for you. The last step, and it has to be done last, by the way, because it can backfire, is to prevent distraction with pacts. And so pacts are pre-commitments, the things that we do in advance to make sure we don't do something we don't want to do, to make sure we don't get distracted in the future. And there's 3 different types of pacts we can use.
So would you also allude, kind of liken those to what people would say, maybe they're setting boundaries? Is that kind of the same principle or the same working thought there?
It depends on what they mean. What I'm talking about is very concrete ways to do it. So I'll give you one example of a pact.
Yeah.
So we've known each other for a little bit here. Can I get kind of personal here for a second?
Do it. Let's go.
Yeah, I may be a little vulnerable. I want to talk about my sex life.
Okay.
So I've been married for 20 years. I'm just happy I have a sex life at this point. And a few years ago, my wife and I noticed that we just were not intimate as much as we used to. And the reason why is because every night we'd be fondling our cell phones and caressing our iPads as opposed to each other.
Yeah.
And so here's what we did. We went to the hardware store and we bought ourselves a $5 outlet timer. And this outlet timer will turn off anything that you plug into it at a certain time of day or night.
Yeah.
We set the timer for 10 p.m. and we plugged in our internet router. So every night, 10 p.m., our internet shuts off.
Smart.
So I made a pact, a pre-commitment, and that's just one example. There are many others we can do. That's just an example of an effort pact. There's also price pacts and identity pacts. But that small bit of effort. Now, could I have gotten on the internet? Of course, I could have figured out a different way to get on. I could have unplugged it. But it's that bit of effort, that bit of friction between me and something I didn't want to do. And that bit of friction reminded me, that's a pre-commitment you made. You made a pact with yourself, and it helped me from getting distracted so that I could turn off the internet and turn on my wife.
I think
that was a bad joke.
I think the reason why that's so powerful, I think we really overestimate willpower. Right? Like willpower is a finite resource. And I think sometimes we just think like, oh yeah, I'm not going to get on my phone first thing in the morning. Dude, if that thing is there, your willpower, you're just depleted when you first wake up. Like you're going to do it. Right. Or you're going to find, so I'm with you. I've had to do that. I was going to tell you some of the things that I've done, and maybe I'm sure you'd give a
but I have to stop you for a second because I agree with you. We don't need willpower. And in fact, some of my friends, when I wrote this book, and it's friends that have known me not from a long time ago, but more recent friends, they say, "Oh, well, this is easy for you because you have a lot of willpower, you have a lot of self-control." But my friends who have known me for a long time know I don't have very much self-control at all. That's not true. That the reason I need these techniques in my life is because I don't have a lot of self-control. I don't have, as I said, I used to be clinically obese because I didn't have a lot of self-control.
Sure.
So it's really about this methodology. If there's one motto I want you to remember, is that the antidote to impulsiveness is forethought. Our species can do something that no other species can do on the face of the earth, which is to plan ahead. We can see the future with greater fidelity than any other species on earth. And so we can plan ahead if we know these techniques. Now, I'm sorry, I have to tell you that you're wrong about the willpower as a depletable resource part.
Interesting. Why?
There's actually a section.
Everything I've read and heard is that it is. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. There was a book. So this is in a chapter of my book called Reimagine Your Temperament. And it's about these self-defeating ideas. So let me tell you about ego depletion. So ego depletion is this idea that willpower is like a gas in a gas tank, that you use it up and then it's gone. Sure.
And so there was a psychologist by the name of Roy Baumeister who did these studies at Florida State University. And he wrote a book about it called Willpower. And then there were a few psychologists who said, this sounds fishy. Baumeister would do these experiments where he could magically restore willpower by giving people lemonade. And the theory was that you see willpower, you run out of it, you have some sugar, and now your willpower is restored. And so, there's been this replication crisis in the social sciences recently. And so this is one of the studies that psychologists said, you know what, let's run this again. Let's see if these experiments, if the results will hold up. And guess what? They didn't.
Interesting.
That willpower as a depletable resource, that ego depletion, turns out there's been several meta studies now that have shown it doesn't exist, except for one group of people.
Who would that be?
There is one group of people who do display ego depletion. And that group of people, these experiments were done by Carol Dweck at Stanford. Turns out that people who experience ego depletion, the only people who experienced ego depletion, were the people who believed it exists.
It was finite.
So think about this for a minute. The way you think about your temperament, the way you think about your capabilities. Oh, I have a short attention span. Oh, I have an addictive personality. Oh, I'm spent. That has a direct impact on what you do.
Interesting.
And so we have to reimagine our temperament, because it turns out that willpower is not a finite resource. In fact, Michael Inslet, another professor who did research on this, he says that willpower is not a finite resource. Rather, it's an emotion.
Interesting.
So I wouldn't say to you, oh, you know what, Chris, I was having a great time. I was full of happy, and then I just ran out of happy. I would never say that. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
and it's the same case with willpower. So the way we deal with these cravings, the way we deal with these feelings, and by the way, I just want to be very clear, I'm not holier than thou, right? I would come home every night after a hard day of work and say, oh, I'm spent. And I'd take a pint of Ben & Jerry's and I'd turn on some Netflix. And that was my version of Netflix and chill all by myself. Yeah. So I know how, and I would make up this excuse of, oh, I'm spent. And I don't say that anymore. Instead, what I do,
interesting.
And this is one of the techniques I preach. It's called the 10-minute rule. The 10-minute rule says that you can give in to any temptation, whether it's that, chocolate ice cream, whether it's, Googling something or checking Twitter, whatever it is that you don't want to do, you can give into it in 10 minutes. But for those 10 minutes, what I want you to do is to acknowledge that sensation, acknowledge that, I'm feeling tired. I'm feeling fatigued. I'm feeling bored, whatever it might be. Acknowledge the sensation, note that sensation, and then explore it with curiosity instead of contempt. I would always tell myself, you see, I have weak self-control. I have a poor attention span. You see, this is why I do it. It's something that's messed up with me. That's contempt. We talk to ourselves in a way that we would never talk to our friends. No,
absolutely. Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. And so we got to stop that.
Yeah.
And instead explore it with curiosity. Why am I feeling this way? Oh, you know what?
Yeah.
I've had a pretty productive day. I've been working pretty hard. That's why I'm tired. Okay. And you do that for just 10 minutes. And I'm telling you, I do this every other day these days. In the span of those 10 minutes, if you just do what's called surfing the urge, you let that emotion crest and subside. By the time you get to the end of that 10 minutes, 9 times out of 10, you don't even want that thing anymore. You find yourself back at work. You're doing what it is you wanted to do. You're back on track.
Interesting. So is that like rationalizing the irrational, or is it just kind of, I'm trying to think why that works at a psychological level. Why these urges come and go like that? Is it because you're objectively looking at it? Like, why do I actually want this thing? And then just recognizing that, like, this is just some innate emotion that I'm feeling that's going to pass. Like, how does that work?
So what's happened is in your brain, you have formed an association between every time I feel bad, every time I feel this emotion, stress, anxiety, uncertainty, fatigue, you name it, I have instant relief from whatever provided relief
whatever
in the past.
That thing is. That makes total
exactly
sense.
And so now you're still getting relief from something, but you're talking yourself down as opposed to saying, okay, give me that beer, give me that chocolate, give me that whatever it might be. As opposed, instead of, dealing with it in a more healthful manner, which is just letting that emotion subside, not blaming yourself, not beating yourself up, offering self-compassion and curiosity instead.
Very, very fascinating. All right. Well, that's what I was going to get into, and I'll be, I not get into sex life stuff, although I'm not afraid to do that. It's just my example isn't my sex life. But this stupid thing, I mean, I love it and I hate it at the same time. So I lovingly call myself a checkaholic. So, and I found, and I've done this, like experimented with myself. Like we went to Puerto Rico. This is where my wife is from. So we went to Puerto Rico, which is like tropical paradise, right? Like we're going to the beach and like doing all this fun stuff. Dude, I left my phone at home just to experiment and see how many times I had a craving. In a matter of 2 hours, I had 8 different times that I wanted to check for my phone in my pocket and realize that it wasn't there.
Nice.
Right. And so terrible, like that's ridiculous. Like 8 times in 2 hours, like that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So then I started to learn, books like The Shallows, where it's like people now check their phone every 7 minutes, and the average adult, like that's preposterous. Like we're all checkaholics. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I've done, and I don't know if this is like a practice or principle that you would suggest to apply to like throughout your life, is my phone is on do not disturb pretty much all day long. And I set alarms for when I'm supposed to eat my snacks, when I'm supposed to take breaks, when I'm supposed to exercise, when I'm supposed to do, like literally throughout my day. And it's not like the wah, like really loud, annoying. It's just a little beep. It just reminds me. And so what I've done now is any of those urges that I have to like reach and check and see what's going on, like check my Facebook ads or check, my downloads or whatever, right? Whatever it is, my email, whatever it is, I give myself permission at those time spots when I have those alarms to look at it during those breaks. Is that a structure that you would advise, or am I getting it right or getting it wrong?
No, that's fantastic. So you're doing more than what 99% of people out there. I mean, 2/3 of people out there don't keep a schedule. Okay. Like, I don't want to hear that you're distracted if you don't even know what you got distracted from. You got to keep a schedule. And I'll give you a link to that you can put in the show notes. I actually built this very easy tool that allows you to create this ideal week template that you can use. The reason this is so important is, though, I want to give you something that you can look at and say, what's distraction for this very minute? How could I know if I'm getting distracted right now? The only way to tell is to see what is traction, to look at my weekly template and say, right now, my plan was to do whatever. I was supposed to check email and I'm on Facebook or I'm doing something else. Now I know the difference between traction and distraction. The only way to tell is to plan ahead. So that's a very, very important step. And we need to do this for all our values. And again, it's not up to me to tell you, Facebook good and, email bad. I don't know. Like, it's not up for me to tell you. What I want you to do is to plan that time with intent. So in my day, I have in my schedule an hour and a half every evening when I check social media. It's great. I love it. But I'm using it on my schedule because it's in my schedule, not on the app maker's schedule.
Love it. All right. So that's a great thing. And I do love your point about the what you're distracted from, because otherwise, and specifically, and let's tie this into entrepreneurship, because we've talked a lot, general high level, but in terms of being an entrepreneur, which vast majority of our audiences, that's why they're listening. I can't imagine why you'd be listening to Entrepreneur Hour podcast if you were an entrepreneur, right? Unless you're just morbid curiosity, right? But I think the problem is that people go from an environment of a structured 9 to 5 in many cases, or even structured academia, higher level education, whatever, where I'm told this is what my day looks like. This is when my class is. This is when my homework's due. This is when this initiative, when we're releasing this thing, whatever, right? All those things are predetermined. And then it's just you just following that like machine, like that you're created to just, do these things in accordance with someone else's schedule that they've laid out for you. Switch that over specifically for more of your, what I would call right brain, whether you believe in that sort of thing or not, more of the creative types that they want to have the freedom and kind of control their own day, is they don't do those things, right? So it's just blank canvas. I get to work on whatever I want to work on. And I think that's part of the hard part for them, is that they're not being intentional. So there's a variety of things that I've tried to teach people as far as like what I do, but how do you advise people to figure out what it is that they should be focusing on when there are so many potential distractions that are out there in relation to what they could or should be working on?
Yeah. Hey, look, I feel your pain. I've helped start 2 companies. I helped found 2 companies. Both were successfully acquired, thankfully. And, I always tell people when I meet with CEOs, I do a lot of angel investing, and I always tell CEOs of startups that your only job as a CEO, you have one job as a CEO. That one job is to prioritize.
Yeah.
Totally. That's your whole job. That's prioritize. Totally. And it is not an easy job. It is very difficult because, I love this quote by Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard said that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. Such a good quote. And it's as if it was written in 2019. It wasn't, of course. It was written a very long time ago.
Timeless.
It's so timeless because look, in our age today, the cost of having the world's information at your fingertips and having endless videos to watch, endless news articles to read, endless debates to be a part of, the cost of all these amazing products is that we need to learn techniques to make sure we can stay indistractable. And then you add in a layer of being an entrepreneur. Oh my God, you have even more freedom, right?
Exactly.
Nobody's checking up on you and saying, hey, are you at your desk and you weren't here at 9 o'clock? That's why many of us become entrepreneurs in the first place. But that means that freedom can be dizzying. So even more important to make sure we understand these techniques. And look, let me tell you, without exception, almost every C-level executive I have ever met at a serious company, every one of them carries around a clipboard with their day's schedule by the minute.
Yep.
And so I'm not sure.
Mine right here.
There you go. Right. And people say, oh, I don't want my day to be, I want time to be spontaneous. Well, you got to choose. Okay. Either you want to be productive, either you want to do what it is that you want to do, either you want to achieve your dreams, or you can be distracted all day. The sad thing is that even when you are, we've had these days where like, oh, I've got the entire day free. I'll get so much done.
Yeah, right.
Those are your least productive days.
Completely.
Right?
Completely.
So structure gives us a constraint. And so where I tell people to start is with, from the time you wake up till when you go to sleep, there's only so many hours in that day. So what I want people to do is to look at this template. And again, I'll give you the link for the show notes. Just look at that weekly template. And I want you to ask yourself, do I have time in my schedule to reflect my values? Is there time in my weekly schedule for me, right? For my health? If health is one of your values, again, I'm not going to tell you what your values should be, but if health, taking care of your body, is one of your values, do you have time for that in your calendar? Yep. Do you have time to take care of your mind? Are you learning? Is that in your calendar? Not just, oh yeah, I'll get to it. Do you have time for your kids, your significant others, your friends, right? Do you have time for them on a repeated schedule, week after week? Is it in your schedule? And then of course, all the stuff you have to do at work. So all of us know, every knowledge worker I've ever talked to, if I ask them, is focused work time important to you? Is coming up with new solutions to hard problems, is that part of your job? Everybody tells me, oh yeah, I totally need to do that. I totally need time to focus and think. And I said, well, where's that time on your schedule?
Exactly.
I'll tell you where it is. It's after work.
Yeah.
Right? That's what we all do. It's like after we're done working, that's when we get time to actually think. So that comes at a price. It comes at a price from our families, from our friends, from our community.
Yeah.
And so we got to put that time in our schedule, or it's just not going to happen. We spend all our day reacting. And for most people, they have no time for reflecting. That time has to be in your schedule. Now,
when you talk about prioritization, because I 100% agree with you, a lot of people, they hear that and that's just a word to them, right? So is it a matter of figuring out, start with the end in mind? Because you talked about values and like what's important to you and stuff like that. But as it relates to their business, since there are so many options, so many platforms, let's just take content creation, for example, right? That's what we're doing right now. We're creating, content for people to consume and so on and so forth, and then buy your book, which they absolutely should do. We're going to include the link below.
Thank you.
But I think the hard part for them is with all of these options, they're struggling with I get to prioritize. I just don't know what the hell to prioritize.
Right.
So is it data driven? And that's a really, really loaded question, right? Because it's all case by case. It's completely case by case.
Right.
So how would you go through that process as a startup founder?
Right. So I'll tell you what I tell companies I'm considering investing in as an angel investor. So when I hear from founders that I've either already invested in or, people who call me and ask for some advice, I like to ask them to consider what I call the contingency pyramid. The contingency pyramid. So the pyramids of Egypt, right?
Sure.
You got the base, then you got the middle, then you got the tippy top. And so we can think of this as a metaphor for things in our life. And what we want to always ask ourselves is, what is the contingency that depends on something else? So, for example, I had an entrepreneur who had this problem with, did he want to get people to use the platform to generate content, or to get celebrities on the platform to draw people to come to the platform and generate content, right? So like there's always kind of, chicken or the egg problem. There's always these stupid, kind of issues around, hey, what should I prioritize first, second, third? But it turns out that if we just think of things in terms of this contingency pyramid, that if we put the pyramid upside down, right? If we try and stabilize a pyramid on its tippy top, it's going to tip over. It's not going to stand. So we have to think, what's the base important things that if we don't have, the next level won't matter. That's the contingency pyramid. What's the stuff that needs to happen first or the next level? The problem is that most often the entrepreneurs I meet with, they want to do the fun, shiny stuff.
Totally.
Right? I want to talk to the celebrities, right? I want to talk to Shaq and see if he'll use my app. Whereas, look, that's great. You got Shaq to use your app, but if nobody's using it around it, what happens when Shaq leaves?
Or if it doesn't work.
Exactly. Or people don't like the damn thing, right? Where did you get? So thinking in terms of this contingency pyramid is really, really important, right? If you try and balance a pyramid on its tip, it tips over. What you want to do is think of the base. What's the big, fat, big, important stuff that you need first before the next layer can stand?
I like that a lot. And the other one I use, and I don't know if you would tie this into it or if you would agree with this, but I personally, when I read the book Essentialism, that just changed the game for me. Because what I realized was this, Nir, is that I was trying to build everything at once, right? I wasn't skipping the steps, which I always say that's one of the things that I say. And that I would liken that to like your pyramid thing. Like, don't skip the steps and go get Shaq. Like, build something that actually people want first, right?
Right. Even if it's 10 friends, that's great.
Right. That doesn't mean you can't accelerate the steps, but don't skip them entirely.
Exactly. Right.
So anyway, I always use, in terms of thinking about, I literally make a list and say, whether is this going to be impactful? Is this something that right now we're excited about? Is this something? And then I kind of put that down and I do the 9 out of 10 or more rule, right? Each one I rank it and put 9, because it's easy to say no to the 1s, 2s, and 3s. It's those 7 and 8s that are really tricky, right? The stuff that you could make an argument for that we should be working on as an organization, but it's not a 9 or 10. So it doesn't mean it necessarily should be right now, but maybe another season of the business. So I try to quantify it in that regard. That way I'm not making subjective decisions, right? It's more along the lines of based in some kind of data or some kind of ranking system. But is that too cut and dry? Like, I know this isn't a binary thing. So is that too cut and dry to approach it that way?
Well, there's lots of different ways to do this. I think another approach is to couch them in terms of questions or experiments, right? So what must be true in order to progress to the next step?
Sure.
Right. It must be true that 10 of my friends love what I built before I hire a multi-million-dollar dev team and go raise a bunch of money. Right? Like asking yourself, don't think about things as like, oh, tasks on a to-do list. I got to do this. Think about them as experiments.
Totally.
What must be true? What's a contingency that if this is true, then we can move on to the next step. Then we can move on to the next step.
Yeah. Have you found that to be really difficult to get people away from the taskmaster mindset? I think it's one of the biggest things that's wrong with entrepreneurs is just playing taskmaster all the time.
Yes.
That it's value creation, not getting stuff done, right? Are you creating value that's meaningful to the world and moving things forward, making an impact? Not are you checking your box of to-dos?
That's right. And really especially hard. So I went to Stanford Business School and we were, I was surrounded. I was one of these people who, you get into Stanford Business School if you're really good at checking boxes.
Exactly.
And it turns out
predicate success on our whole lives is checking boxes.
And I learned that game. And let me tell you, I was really, really good at checking boxes. Sure. So I'll tell you a quick story, actually. So I had a professor by the name of Andy Ratcliffe, who's one of the most successful venture capital investors in history. He invested in eBay back in the day. He made at the time it was the largest VC return ever.
That's right.
And he told us, and he taught a class at Stanford. He was one of my professors, and he told us that one of the tests he gives to an entrepreneur he's thinking about investing in is that he calls it, he has the pitch meeting if he likes the business model, et cetera, and he's trying to feel out whether this entrepreneur is going to be able to cut it. He gives them a link. He emails them the next day a list of like 40 things he wants them to do by a certain date. Now he knows that it's impossible to do. And what he wants to see is what the entrepreneur will do. The entrepreneurs that come in and burn the midnight oil for 5 nights straight and answer every single one of his questions, he doesn't give money to.
Interesting.
He only gives money to the entrepreneur who says, look, Andy, I appreciate these questions. Here are the 5 questions that actually matter. The other stuff, if you want, I can focus on later, but here's the 5 that really matter and why you should consider them. That's the defining trait he's looking for.
That even feels cringe when you're not an entrepreneur and you haven't experienced that.
Yeah.
Right. But right there, I think alone, that if people could nail that, just that alone, it would change their life, how they're approaching their business.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that alone. And I think that ties back into the reason I bring this up. I'm not trying to go down a rabbit hole here. I think that ties back into what we're talking about with the distractibility stuff, with being indistractable.
Right. So once you know,
are not 40 things.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. For the entrepreneur, this is a really tricky thing to master, because as I said, a lot of entrepreneurs out there are very smart. You did well in school, you got A's, you got into a good school, whatever. And now you have to kind of retrain your brain to not check every box, right? Checking every box an entrepreneur hurts you. You don't want to do that. But what I think there's another hurdle, another challenge is even when you know what to do, right? We all basically know what to do. If you want to have a good looking body and be healthy, you have to eat right and exercise. If you want to have good relationships, you have to be fully present with people. If you want to do well at your job, you got to do the work, right? Even the hard stuff. We know what to do. Why is it that even when we know what to do, we get distracted? And that's where I think a lot of these tools come in handy is that's what's so frustrating, right? Like you've prioritized, you've strategized, you've met with your team, you all agree on your goals, you sit down at your desk, and let me just check email for a second.
And I think that goes back to what you're talking about before with the negative self-talk, which then makes it a perpetual problem that just spirals out of control, right? Right.
So the reason that negative self-talk is so harmful, as are those temperament beliefs around, I'm out of gas in my gas tank and all that stuff, is that, okay, so here's what happens. You fall behind, you do something you didn't want to do, you regret what you did, and then you start saying to yourself, oh, you see, this is you're defective. You have a short attention span, addictive personality. Something's wrong with you. And so that makes you feel what? That makes you feel bad.
Insufficient, inadequate.
And what do you do when you feel bad? You look for other things to escape that discomfort. This is why I became obese. Because I would eat when I felt crappy, not because I was hungry. I ate when I felt sad, lonely, whatever, insecure. And then I would feel crappy that I had eaten so much. And so what was the solution? More eating. And that was this crazy cycle that we have to get ourselves out of.
That is so fascinating. All right, man. Well, I would love to keep talking. We could probably talk for hours and hours and hours, but we are flat out of time. Literally, we've got 2 minutes. So just let us know where people can go check out the book. The book is called Indistractible. When does it come out? Is it already out?
No, September 9th. September 10th. September 10th.
Okay.
And there's lots of free resources at Indistractible.com. There's, even if you don't buy the book, there's an 80-page workbook, all kinds of stuff that you can get there at Indistractible.com. It's Indistractable, Indistractible.com.
Perfect. And in terms of pre-orders, they can pre-order now on Amazon or from Indistractable.com.
Absolutely. They can pre-order wherever they like. And actually, if you pre-order the book and send me the order number from wherever you ordered from, whether it's a local bookseller, Amazon, wherever, and you go to Indistractable.com and input the order number, I will send you the PDF of the entire book right now that you can start reading months before it's on bookstore shelves.
Beautiful. It's amazing, guys. Cool. All right. That link's included below, guys. You can check that out. Nir, awesome, man. I really enjoyed our chat. And again, I wish we had more time. Maybe we'll have to do a part 2 of this one.
That sounds great. Thanks so much.
All right, brother.